Spirituality is the stepchild in healthcare. And spirituality is the stepchild even in people's lives. Even religious people see their religious life as one compartment of their life, rather than something that affects the whole of life. And that, I think, is why we talk about, as pastors, try to encourage people to have a personal relationship with Jesus, or a personal stake in religion, and a personal experience in religion, because we are wanting them to experience that it is something of the whole rather than one of the parts. If I would say the heresy of mainline congregations and mainline churches is that we have made religion in terms of belief in particular sets of doctrines, particular sense of beliefs, and if you believe thus and so, you are Christian, you're a good guy. Woe to the person like my brother, who died in February. Woe to my person like my brother, who questioned the resurrection of the dead as he was involved in hospice. In fact, he went so far as to suggest that the resurrection of the dead, believing in the resurrection for the dead, was not only archaic, but not helpful for the spiritual life, as he came to understand it. Because he asked the question, is there a reason to believe in Jesus that goes beyond getting the care at the end of life? Is there a reason to connect with God that goes beyond making sure I have rice to live that day? The so-called rice Christians. And how much of end of life, preparing for the end of life, is but a means of providing a means of ultimate rice Christians? He said there's a good reason to connect with God now, in this life. He was very influenced by Marcus Borg in the latter part of his life. I kept feeding him some Marcus Borg stuff, and he just took it like to him, and he started thinking about the kingdom of God and all of that kind of stuff and what that means, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. What Nancy and I, as we lifted up, as she talked about defining spirituality in terms of that holistic or that center, we've decided to take the body, mind, spirit paradigm, which is affirmed by everybody in healthcare and probably every person that you can talk to. Who are we as persons? We are body, mind, spirit. I mean, that is common amongst our culture. Okay, let's take a look at that. And let's look at the body, mind, and spirit from a spiritual viewpoint. Not necessarily a religious, but from a spiritual viewpoint in terms of what difference it makes in my life. Because people become Muslim and remain Muslim because it is answering these questions for them, just like as Christians, the same questions are being answered in a Christian way. So we're getting back to those questions rather than always the answer. So let's take a look at the mind. Physiology might call it health. Psychology might call it integration. But spirituality calls it connection with God, wholeness, when you are whole, when you are connected, when you have a God moment in your life, or a spiritual moment that goes, oh, whatever, whether God is attached to it, the word God is attached to it or not. You have a sense of being whole, connected, body, mind, spirit. We're a whole person. And the goal is to be this whole person who is integrated and connected and thriving. That's what the goal is. That's what we're trying to have happen. And I believe that's what healthcare means when they say wholeness. The big emphasis today is on wholeness. What do we mean by that? They usually will talk about it physiologically and psychologically and sociologically, but they rarely will begin talking about that spiritually. Rarely. Particularly if the person is a-religious or non-religious or non-theistic in their perspective. A lot of times healthcare people just check off the whole issue of spirituality. Thus, core beliefs, core values, that drive one, that focus one. There's the glasses through which people see the world. So, what are some of the emotional changes that happen among people? We're thinking about the mind now. So what are some of the emotional things that happen that are challenges for older adults? Losing a memory. Alzheimer's, dementias, any kind of dementias. Grief, yeah. Why grief?
Losing a loved one, losing their own faculties,
Loss of purpose, meaning, grief. Everything has changed. Pain, suffering. Time out. I didn't sign up for this. Right? And these people that are in the care center at Vista Del Monte with this chronic pain, they're basically saying, I didn't sign up for this. Wait a minute. Time out. I didn't plan to live this long, and I really don't want to live this long, and because it's a pain, literally. Do I be worried about running out of money? Which by the way, and I don't know whether your church, you are, your husband's a pastor. It's a stewardship question, isn't it? It becomes a question of understanding of where money plays in your life. Do you have to have money in order to be loved? Stewardship sermon. I could get going on that right now. Okay? But that's what we're talking about. And that's what they're struggling about, and these are spiritual struggles. Yes, you can. It is sometimes helpful to medicate people. I am a chronic depressive. Since I have been treated for depression, I have had 6 major clinical depressions. I probably had 4 to 5 prior to my being treated. So I can say I've had 9 to 10 clinical depressions in my life. In fact, one after the last dip, my psychiatrist said, well, Don, you now graduated. You are no longer a reoccurring depressive. You are a chronic depressive. Thanks. And what that means is you're always going to have it. It's always going to be there. So I am under 40 milligrams of fluoxetine or Prozac and 225 milligrams of Effexor or Venlafaxine a day, and I will be for the rest of my life. That's helpful for me because my serotonin factory has always been screwed up. So that's helpful for me biologically. But I also have that has given me a foundation to allow me to deal with some of the stuff that occurs, both from a psychological, psychiatric vantage point, but also from a spiritual vantage point, and the two are not so are not so different, as we will see. Psychology and religion, historically, when it first began, was not particularly in conflict. Where did psychology begin? Who was the first psychotherapist? Enter parish priest. Confession. People were receiving psychiatric treatment a long time before Freud. Only Freud began the process of looking at it and trying to discover really what's going on here. And thus you get all the different things that happen. So religion and thus, because psychology becomes here I'm trying to help you get in touch with some of your core beliefs and core values and core things. The religious world goes, that's our territory. And the psychological world says, you are just going to try to brainwash people to believe in a particular structure, rather than allowing them to be free to make their own structure. Therefore, psychology and religion has often been in conflict, particularly at the beginning of my ministry in the 1960s and 70s. I think it's beginning to change. My particular psychiatrist is a practicing Coptic Christian, and that is indeed extremely valuable description of him and of his life and who he is. And yet both of these disciplines, if you will, seek to understand what it means to be human and how the human works. What is the problem? What is the strengths? How do we get out of the problems? How do we maximize the strengths? That is psychology, but that's also religion. We have confession. We have all sorts of ways. We got Ash Wednesday coming up. We got all sorts of things that we do in order to help people to get a grip on who they are and who they might be. That religion does the same thing. Now we can look at the human according to, and I have done a lot of reading, and I just focused on these two psychological concepts. Or psychological schools of thought or whatever. One is existential psychotherapy, which has been absolutely incredible in my reading, just amazing. The other is cognitive behavioral therapy, of which I am a 15-year product of, because most therapists, psychotherapists, if you go to, are cognitive behavioral. 98% will be using those processes. But then also the spiritual, or I use the word spiritual companioning, to give us a sense of the spiritual what? Well, I'm talking about spiritual companioning to help a person connect with themselves and with what is of value in their lives. Existential psychotherapy, there you see some of the proponents of that. Soren Kierkegaard is the founder of existential psychotherapy. Now, what was he? He's a pastor. He's a theologian. I studied him in seminary. I did not study him in my psych class. And yet here he is. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. How many of you read that book? It's a classic in terms of and it's seen by how a person gains meaning, and if a person has meaning, going back to Heidegger, he says, if I have a reason to get up in the morning, I can live with any way I have to live in the morning. Which means if I have a reason to live in the morning, I can even get up in the morning even if I have pain. It's not that the pain goes away, it's like the pain becomes unimportant, but it's there and I have to deal with it, but it's still not important. Something else has become important. Rollo May, many of our pastors have studied him in seminary, and Irving Yalom, who is probably one of the great proponents currently. Wonderful work. The existential psychotherapists, their understanding of man is human beings are creatures of a continual change and transformation, living essentially finite lives in a context of strength and weakness, as well as opportunities and limitations created by their environment. Human beings are creatures of continual change and transformation. Stop there. Do you believe that? That life is that they live an essentially finite lives in the context of strengths and weaknesses, as well as opportunities and limitations, all created by their environment. That's the human understanding, that's the goal, shall we say, of existential psychotherapy. Because existential psychotherapy deals with ultimate concerns, as Melanie Lockett says there. And these ultimate concerns are four. And these are ultimate existential issues that are unresolvable. We can't answer them. We can't come to a conclusion that satisfies us. We can only learn to live with them and, in fact, learn from them. And so, therefore, the focus of existential psychotherapy is first and foremost helping people to examine the role of death in their life. That the whole concept of me, Don Koepke, dying, I'm only beginning to have an existential awareness of that. I've always had the awareness that people die, but I have not had an awareness that I am going to die, nor is it the 18-year-old who's over in Afghanistan kicking down doors, which I wouldn't do because I am more aware that I can get killed at that. And these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids that are knocking the doors down, they say, yeah, somebody's going to die, but it's going to be me. I'm going to make sure it's them. And so that whole issue of the role and the place of death in our lives, we cannot imagine what that is like. We cannot imagine what it means not to be anymore. Now, we can theistically say, yes, we move on to a resurrection, to a life beyond, but we're talking about this life right now, what we can observe right now. And the reality is, this gets to why sometimes even the most religious people are afraid to die. Why? They look at the experience of nothing, even though they have this promise, and they believe this promise all the time. But it's only a promise. That's all it is. And so when I get to that point, it's like, I don't know. Okay? Whereas if we came to grips with that, with the reality that I am going to die, that my life is finite, if I am going to die, and that everything I believe, everything I know is going to be gone, I'm going to live this life with a lot more gusto. And I will begin to remember or to believe that what happens in this life every day is of great value. That's what the existential psychotherapist tries to get a person to. Freedom. You think, huh? Everybody wants freedom. Yeah. But with freedom goes a responsibility. If I am free to change anything in my life, which is an existential psychotherapy position, it's also a cognitive therapy position. It's also a spirituality position. If I am free to change my life, then all the changes I did not make, I am responsible for, not somebody else. And any changes I do not make from this time forth are also my responsibility. It's also my decision. You really want that. But that's what it's about. If you're free, it means that you're responsible. Wow. Okay? Isolation. No one can really walk in my moccasins. We say that in order to know a person, you have to walk a mile in their moccasins. Even walking 2 miles in the moccasins, 1,000 miles in my moccasins will not help you understand me. I am an amalgamation of all sorts of events, many of whom I don't even remember. And that cannot be altered. It just is. And thus that has formed who I am. And therefore, no one really can know me. We all would say we want connectedness, but I think that is really true. That no one can really know me outside of maybe God. Again, if you go to a theistic position. Finally, meaning. And meaning in an inherently meaningless world. There is nothing in this world that is in and of itself meaningful. That includes religion. Meaning is always given to something. It's attributed to something. It does not have meaning in and of itself. I can say that standing up and talking to you is a meaningful event. But would you like to do what I'm doing? Would you find what I'm doing, Sue, would you find that a meaningful event to stand up here and talk to all these people? Maybe? Or would that be a little scary? It would be exciting, but it would be scary. I don't find it scary anymore, see? But what I'm trying to say is everything that we do is attributed meaning because I decide it's meaningful and you've decided that it's not. And thus I am a Christian because I've decided it's meaningful and other people have decided it's not. Otherwise, we'd all be Christian. We'd all be religious. This is existential. This is existential. Big time. This is big time existential. This is what you encounter as you deal in the world. And there is certain realities to that. But meaning, so therefore, an emotionally healthy person has the ability to navigate the complexity of one's life, the world, and one's relationship with the world. So an emotionally healthy person, the goal of psychotherapy, the goal of existential psychology, is to give people a sense that they can and the tools to navigate all the ups and downs, the craziness that they find within their life. Some of those things are unresolvable, namely death, freedom, isolation, and meaning. And so that you can navigate around these things. That's what the goal of psychotherapy in existential psychotherapy is. Instead of the awareness of death, isolation, freedom, and meaningless producing anxiety, oh my God, which ends up with defense mechanisms, I don't want to deal with this stuff. The same awareness with EPT, with the existential psychotherapy, seeks to bring insight into yourself and the world rather than anxiety, and thus you move towards authentic living. You can live authentically as you are rather than what you believe you're supposed to be. And so by exploring these things, and seldom are they explored directly in therapy, seldom are they, okay, let's talk about meaninglessness. It doesn't work that way. But within the framework, as you deal with people, you deal with these kinds of things of death, isolation, freedom, meaningless, and the goal is to gain insight. And the insight is what enables you to live authentically as you are, rather than what you believe or someone else believes you're supposed to be. Cognitive behavioral therapy. This is the one that all of your therapists today are involved in. Most. Aaron Beck was the founder of it. His daughter Judith is carrying on the thing. And Albert Ellis was another of the big time person. I think Ellis was in the Midwest someplace. I think, I want to say St. Louis, I want to say, but that may not be right. And in cognitive therapy, their understanding of the human is this, and I had to dig a little bit for this, and I found it finally, and et cetera, that the human being is fundamentally capable of language, communication, and action, and is an autonomous and potentially rational subject. In other words, he's an autonomous person and a rational person who can change one's life and one's world by what one thinks. And the goal is to establish aims that are independent of others, goals in life that are not because mother told me I'm supposed to be a pastor, I'm going to be a pastor, okay? That's not what we're talking about. To develop a hierarchical action of plans as you think about stuff that you want to do. And if you've ever been in psychotherapy, this becomes very familiar to you. I'm sure you can remember your psychologist doing this for you. And then behave according to personal aims and action plans. Where you do it, and then you come back and she says, how's it gone? And every time at the end of every therapy session, there's homework. Something to work on that you've been talking about. The whole idea is to engage core beliefs. It's somehow to get in touch with core beliefs, because out of core beliefs comes one's assumptions. Out of one's assumptions through the situation comes automatic thoughts. I'm supposed to do this. Knee-jerk reactions. Reactions that I've always done and I always do just because I've done it. And thus they react to the situation as they always have. But the core beliefs is the place where it comes. A healthy person is self-regulated. In other words, I can figure out stuff for myself. Is an expert in my problems. That's interesting. For me to become an expert in my problems. And is self-determined, autonomous, and personally free. CBT focuses on the internal structures, thoughts, and feelings of being a human being. So that's what it does. It focuses on these internal structures, thoughts, feelings, with the goal of becoming self-determined, becoming aware, being in charge of your life, rather than allowing something else to focus your life.